If you want the Chicago Bears to make a trade before the NFL trade deadline, like this video. Maybe you want to trade someone away. Maybe you want to bring somebody in. Hit that like button if you want Ryan Poles and the Bears to make a trade. Because coming up on today's show, 5 Bears trade targets before the trade deadline. What's up, guys? I'm Harrison Graham from Bears Now by Chat Sports, and we're going to dive into some trade targets in a second, but just some background information here. The trade deadline is on October 31st, so we're getting close, about 3 weeks away. Bears still obviously have needs on their roster. You don't start 0-4 without holes on your roster, and I think something we definitely know is that Ryan Poles isn't scared to make a trade. He's traded key players away. He's brought in numerous players, some that have worked, some that have not. Chase Claypool, DJ Moore, hell yes. So he has not been afraid to pull the trigger. Now, I do wonder over these next few weeks is how much is that Claypool debacle on his mind? Because if you're Ryan Poles as a young GM who's been a little bit under fire early on in his tenure, you can't have a Chase Claypool 2.0 situation. Like, you cannot trade a second-round pick, especially one that ends up being the number 32 overall pick, for a player that gives you nothing. So I do think he'll be a little bit more cautious overall, so keep that in mind. I want to start with 2 players on the same team to kick off today's show because they play the same position and they are on the same team. Montez Sweat, Chase Young, edge rushers for the Washington Commanders, 2 players that the Bears have seen up close for the past 2 years. Young was hurt last year when they played Washington, but they saw him the other night. Obviously, they've seen Sweat twice now, this regime has in the last 2 years, both ironically on Thursday night football games. And something to remember, too, when it comes to these 2 players. Both Chase Young and Montez Sweat are 2024 free agents. So if you're looking ahead for Washington, some logic would be that, well, they may have to pick one because they've already paid Daron Payne. They've already paid Jonathan Allen. Now, could they pay one and tag the other? Yeah, it's certainly possible. They could keep both if they really wanted to, but there's a common thought out there that keeping one and letting go of the other or trading the other could be a possibility. Now, you look at what these 2 guys have done this year. They've been really good players, right? They're 2 good pass rushers. Montez Sweat leads in the tackle and sack category. TFLs as well, has 2 forced fumbles to Chase Young's none, but Chase Young is getting a ton of pressure. 27 pressures already in 5 games. Montez Sweat has 19, still a really good number. So he finishes more often, but Chase Young is wreaking havoc more consistently than Montez Sweat. I know a lot of Bears fans have been intrigued by Chase Young for a very long time. And keep an eye on the Washington Commanders. There's a thought, too, that Ron Rivera's hot seat status could really ramp up here. That was a bad loss for him in his tenure there to lose at home by 20 to the Bears. And if a couple more losses stack up, I would not be shocked at all if they fired him midseason and could then opt to trade a few pieces away, including one of Montez Sweat or Chase Young. And maybe a team like the Bears, even if they're not making a move to contend, would view a Montez Sweat or a Chase Young as 2 young pass rushers. You could bring one in to extend for 2 or 3 years and build this roster with. So pick one. Who would you rather have? Type MS for Montez Sweat, CY for Chase Young. Obviously, Young is younger, but he's also had more injuries. Sweat is a little older, but he's been more consistent in the sack department. I'd probably lean Chase Young. I like what I've seen out of him this year. He's causing a lot of problems for opposing quarterbacks, but I'd be open to either. Obviously, price dependent. I would not give up either of my first-round picks to get them. Okay, let's go to our third player here. Courtland Sutton, the wide receiver from the Broncos. Now, this does give me Claypool vibes, like big physical receiver who has been productive at times, unproductive at others. But let's get to that part of it in a second. First, the reason we mentioned him here is the Broncos could be big sellers. That report is already out there. They're looking to trade Frank Clark. They already traded Randy Gregory. They don't like where they're at, so they're going to sell off veteran pieces. Now, Courtland Sutton's only 27 years old, so it's not like he's super old. He's been fairly decent this year, 21 catches, 229, and 3 touchdowns. He's on pace for, quick math here, like 800-yard season and pretty much double-digit touchdowns. I mean, 3 touchdowns in 5 games. That's right on pace for about 10 touchdowns. So, to be a number 2, number 3 type, that's decent. Now, again, I do get Claypool-y vibes here to make this move, but there are reasons that I would consider this, which I will explain here in just a few moments. But first, I do want to tell you guys about our sponsor for today's show, and that is Prize Picks. I gotta be honest, I'm having a blast here with Prize Picks. Daily fantasy sports. I don't have to wait for my typical fantasy leagues for Sundays to get in on the action. I can make picks every single day because it's not just NFL. It's not just college football. It's NBA preseason action. You can get in on the Major League Baseball players as well. And the way it works is you pick 2 to 6 players and go for more or less than their stat projections. For example, on Monday Night Football, I took the less on Jimmy Garoppolo passing yards, took the more on Devontae Adams receiving yards, and that was to win 3x the money. On that one, you can win up to 25 times the money if you do a 6-player pick. 2 to 6 players, that's how it works. To get going with Prize Picks. The more players, the more bang for your buck you can get if you do hit. At Prize Picks, you're not competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks. Get started today. You're going to have a blast. Trust me. PrizePicks.com/CLNS. Use code CLNS. They'll give you a deposit match up to $100. That link, PrizePicks.com/CLNS and promo code CLNS is available in the comments and description of this video. Use our link and promo code to get that deposit match. Okay, Courtland Sutton's remaining contract. The reason I'm not just going to completely dismiss this because, oh, God, the Claypool situation, which, again, that should be on Ryan Pohl's mind, is his contract is actually very affordable. Don't worry about the dead cap hit this year because, obviously, if you trade for him, you're not going to cut him this year. But if you don't like what you see, dead cap hit, $7.6 million next year. Not a huge deal. Even less than next year, 3.8. And his cap hit is $13.5 million next year, $14 million the year after that. That's pretty controllable money here for a player that's been pretty productive. Now, again, I like Sutton. I would be surprised just because of what happened in the Claypool situation. And I'll add one more caveat, too. I do wonder if in the back of Ryan Pohl's mind, he's already thinking, okay, I might be drafting Marvin Harrison this year. So if I'm doing that, why would I trade for Courtland Sutton? So I don't think it's very likely, but I think his contract's pretty reasonable, and he's a big body receiver that's not a bomb like Claypool, if that makes sense. So just a name to monitor. Denver's in a fire sale. What if they get so desperate they're like, hey, we'll take a 5th for him? I don't think that would happen, but if it's a day 3 pick for Courtland Sutton, I think you could entice me. Okay, Bryce Huff, the Jets edge rusher. We've talked about him before here on this channel because in the offseason we were looking for tons of avenues to get an edge rusher in here to bolster this pass rush. Now, his raw stats will not jump off the page. They just will not. But he is a pass rushing menace when he gets opportunities. Look at his PFF grades this year, okay? 77 overall, 76 pass rush rate. He has 26 pressures so far this year. He's only played 107 total snaps, 87 pass rush snaps. 26 of 87 pass rush snaps, he's getting a pressure. That's pretty damn efficient, guys. Like, that's a very good pressure rate. He's just buried in New York. That defensive line is absolutely loaded. He's like their 5th edge. But they even still rotate him in because as a situational rusher, he gets home often. Now, is he as impactful as an every down player? I don't know. But can he play more than what he is? I mean, 87 pass rush snaps in 5 games. That's what? 15 a game or so? 17 a game or so? I mean, can he handle 30 pass rush snaps a game and keep up that pressure rate at a pretty similar clip? If he can, there are some reasons to bring him in here. He's only 25 years old, for one. So he's a guy who is on a 1-year deal right now, so I think you'd want to extend him. His pressure rate at almost 30% is just outrageous. And I know he's playing next to good dudes, but he's been doing this for a couple years now. Like, this is not just this season. I don't think a trade would be that massive in terms of how much you'd have to give up. I doubt it would be a day 2 pick. You're probably looking at like a 4th or 5th. And I don't think an extension would cost that much either because he's not proven as a starter. So you could maybe get him on like a 2-year, $12 million extension. And then if he's doubling his snaps and still as productive, you're like, this is one of the best contracts in the NFL. So he's an under-the-radar player, but if the Jets were open to moving him, I would be very intrigued to bring Bryce Huff in here because I think he deserves a bigger opportunity. One more guy here, Derrick Brown, the defensive tackle for the Carolina Panthers. Now, if you're thinking Derrick Brown, where does that sound familiar? Well, I'll tell you in a second where you've probably heard that name before. First, again, you look at the raw stats. it's not like going to step out to you, right? He's at times he's been more of a run stopper. He's more of a penetrator, and guys around him finish plays like Brian Burns, for example, on that defensive line. But remember, when the Bears were negotiating with the Panthers to trade down from the number 1 pick, they had 3 players they were interested in. DJ Moore, who they wanted the most and got, Brian Burns, and Derrick Brown. Now, I think if Derrick Brown ended up being the player, they would have probably gotten an extra premium pick because I don't think is as valuable as a Brian Burns or DJ Moore. But Ryan Poles liked Derrick Brown a lot. He mentioned his name during those negotiations. So you've already got that in place. I'm intrigued by this. I don't know what you would trade to get him. I mean, is it a day 2 pick? Again, I'm not trading a first-round pick. 3rd? 2nd? I don't know if I want to trade a 2nd, maybe a future 2nd, maybe that 2025 2nd. You could say, hey, Carolina, we'll give you your 2nd next year back, the one you gave us in the DJ Moore trade. I could potentially be open to that, but Derrick Brown is a guy that you could plug under this defensive line. He's 25 years old. Get more of a pass rushing D lineman. Maybe Javon Dexter ends up being that guy playing next to him. Dexter had 6 pressures last week, but there's no doubt you got to bolster that group. Not just this year, but long term. So I just thought it was a name worth mentioning. Carolina's 0-5. They could look to recoup some capital after trading up last year with Chicago, obviously. And Derrick Brown is one of their stronger pieces. All right, there you go. 5 Bears trade targets to keep an eye on here over the next few weeks. Both of the edge rushers in Washington, Chase Young, Montez Sweat. Courtland Sutton, I doubt it happens. It just feels Claypool-y to me, even though Sutton doesn't have the off-the-field concerns. Bryce Huff, the edge in New York, and then Derrick Brown, the Carolina defensive tackle. Now, name a player that the Bears should trade for. Shout his name out in the comments. Maybe I'm forgetting somebody. I'm sure someone's going to say Brian Burns. The reason I didn't mention him is they want to get a premium receiver. I guess in theory you could trade them a premium pick and then they flip that for a receiver, but I just don't think the Bears are going to get Brian Burns in a trade. I would be surprised, but drop a name down in the comments right now. And be sure to subscribe because if the Bears do make a trade for any player or trade away a player, we're going to have it covered. We're going to go live here on Chicago Bears Now, just like we did when Chase Claypool got traded. So we are the channel for you. Subscribe and turn on those notifications.